Hey there, this is Tom with the Diogenes Lamp podcast. I appreciate you listening in, and most importantly, I hope you enjoy what you hear. Before we start with today's episode, I'm going to ask you for a small favor. Believe it or not, history podcasts, especially in their early stages, tend not to be cash cows. Shocker, I know. I too was blindsided by this news. Now, I didn't go into this for the money, I think that much is obvious. But unfortunately, books, research materials, and equipment aren't free. Please, go to patreon.com/Diogenes Lamp Podcast, and for less than the price of a coffee once a month, you can become a member and get access to bonus episodes, recommended reading lists and documentaries, shout-outs, and anything else we'll offer in the future as this project grows. If you are especially broke, hey, I get it, but please, make sure to give us a 5-star review when you listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to the pod on your preferred podcast listening medium. Your support is appreciated, and more importantly, it is needed in order to keep this operation going. On that note, I hope you have a great day, and now back to the show. Hey everyone, for today's episode, we'll be talking about a place a bit down the ways from Greece, but with connections and roots to Hellenism that go back thousands of years, Ethiopia. And we'll specifically be talking about the Yekatit Massacre, which occurred during the Second Abyssinia War. This was when Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935 and occupied it until 1941. Obviously, a topic like this is completely out of my wheelhouse. So I brought in an expert on the topic and a good friend of the pod, Julian McBride, who has written about and researched on Ethiopia extensively. Julian McBride is a former U.S. Marine, a forensic anthropologist, and independent journalist born in New York. He reports and documents the plight of people around the world who are affected by conflicts, rogue geopolitics, and war, and also tells the stories of war victims whose voices are never heard. Julian is the founder and director of the Reflections of War Initiative, an anthropological NGO which aims to tell the stories of the victims of war through art therapy. As a former Marine, he uses this technique not only to help heal PTSD, but also to share people's stories through art, which conveys, quote, the message of the brutality of war better than most news organizations, end quote. Take care and enjoy the show. I really want to have you on today to share kind of what drove me to reach out to you and to talk about this topic specifically, as there's a lot of topics that you write about and do research on that have overlap with the topics I talk about on my podcast. But I thought this was important, just one, because I glossed over this whole topic in the podcast largely, and two, the contrast of the behavior of the Italians in the occupation of Greece. And I mean, just the frank barbarity of the Italian occupation of Ethiopia. I mean, it's night and day. It's not even close. And, the Italians are often looked at as the junior partner, not just in war and success and strength and whatnot, but also like often a little bit more in brutality. You could say, listen, the Italians perhaps didn't directly, gas 6 million people in concentration camps, primarily Jews, although they went along with it and helped facilitate it and, give them, yada, yada. But after reading this, I thought maybe if they could kill 6 million Africans in concentration camps, I thought maybe they would, because this is a little crazy reading. It's quite jarring reading about this for the first time. I had no idea. Would you say that's a bit of a hyperbole on my part? Or what are your thoughts on just the idea of the Italians often getting overlooked for atrocities in general?
I think it's because Italy primarily, their involvement in World War II was primarily focused in the Mediterranean and Africa, which really isn't talked about as much compared to Western Europe, the Eastern Front, or even the occupation of Yugoslavia. So those type of theaters get overlooked.
Good point. I mean, that's really, really solid. It's funny, too, that today in today's political climate, even to say something like, it's because Africa is occupied by black people that this would be like some kind of controversial take or something, something like that, just given the way politics. But even, but yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, actually. I didn't think about that at all, just given the geographic location of where events were taking place, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Africa is always overlooked, unfortunately. So let's get into context a little bit. Leading up to the war, where does Ethiopia stand like in history? I know this is, we don't have that much time. You could write books on this, of course, but just going back, I mean, Ethiopia has biblical connections, and we could go even further back than this, correct?
Yeah, the foundations of Ethiopia laid back into the Old Testament that King David of ancient Israel had a son with the Solomon, and he would have a child called Menelik the First from the Queen of Sheba of Ethiopia. Menelik the First would be the first founding emperor of Ethiopia, and the pretty much the hierarchy spread over 3,000 years. Ethiopia would become a major Roman ally. Almost every emperor would receive gifts from the Ethiopian emperor, such as giraffes or lions.
Oh my gosh.
And even then, when the Roman Empire fell from the Ottoman Empire, Ethiopia actually had several wars against the Ottoman-backed Adel Sultanate of Somalia. Sorry, and ultimately, yeah, Ethiopia would become probably the most developed African kingdom, even during the age of colonialism. The race for Africa was that Italy wanted to conquer Ethiopia, and they nearly tried to do it at the Battle of Adwa in 1896. The garrison of the Italian kingdom was massacred because they were trapped by impossible mountains by Emperor Menelik II. And one of the commanders of this battle for Ethiopia was Ras Makonnen Sr., who was the father of Emperor Haile Selassie, the last Ethiopian emperor.
Oh, wow.
And that battle, that loss was such a humiliation for Italy. I would say it played a role into Italy's growing fascism, because most of Europe, they would not live that down, that a European superpower got beaten by an African kingdom.
Right.
And I think that played a major role in Italy's later ferocity during the occupation of Ethiopia.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound, that's brought up a lot just from the writing, almost like we need to avenge the catastrophe of the First Abyssinia War. For the listeners, of course, Abyssinia is, like the, I don't know, traditional name, would you say, of Ethiopia?
Yeah, that's what I think it was what the world called it. Like locals Ethiopians, they would call it Ethiopia, but the world
Oh,
called it Abyssinia.
gotcha. Okay, understood. So, I mean, that's really amazing. And it just sounds there's so much more like Ethiopia, I feel like, is a very overlooked, all of Africa, of course, but Ethiopia especially seems to be very different than its neighbors and whatnot. I had no idea that they were also fighting Ottoman sultanates and stuff like that. It's way over my head. Can we talk more about him, Halisi Melinik? I'm sorry, I know I'm messing up his name. He sounds like such an interesting character. I had no idea. I mean, up until this reading, of course, I had no idea he was linked to, like, King Solomon and stuff like that. That's amazing.
Yeah, they call the Ethiopian monarchy the House of Solomon because it's basically a lineage, biblical lineage, though it's not been proven. It's just been an Ethiopian tradition for 3,000 years. And he was the last emperor. His father, like I said, he was the cousin of Emperor Menelik II, who was one of the major commanders of the Battle of Adwa. He became regent in 1924 after a power usurpation. Emperor Menelik died, but his wife became emperor. But back then, being a female emperor was just like a no taboo in that type
Of
of
course, yeah,
time.
standard.
So he would usurp the throne, become regent, and he was Western educated. He traveled the world. He actually he did education in both France and the United Kingdom, and he would become emperor in the 30s. And unfortunately, back then, that was when the rise of Mussolini happened, where he declared he wanted to create a new Roman empire. But it shocked Ethiopia because Ethiopia was never part of the Roman Empire. But he made it perfectly clear that he wanted to fully colonize East Africa. And
this is standard Mussolini, by the way. It sounds like saying something that's not part of the Roman Empire, or something that we want to be part of the Roman Empire, but this part was never part of the Roman. Peak Mussolini. Oh my gosh! And then what about? This is another thing that blew my mind when I started researching. There's a link between HIM. That's right. That's the short.
Yeah, that's pretty much His Imperial Majesty. That's pretty much like his formal title.
Between HIM and Rastafarianism. Can you speak on that a bit for the listeners?
Yeah, that grew as a lot of Ethiopians and Jamaican, well, pretty much a lot of Jamaicans. I guess when he visited, because he was very, very close to the United Kingdom, the UK gave him amnesty during World War II, and he was very, very big on Christianity. He united a lot of the Oriental Orthodox churches that their clergies never met for over 1,000 years. He was able to unite them.
Wow.
So, Ras Makonnen, Emperor Haile Selassie, he gained a cult around him that a lot of Africans thought he was the second coming of Jesus Christ. So that's where, like, a lot of Jamaica, when he visited Jamaica, a lot of Jamaicans hearing about all his stories, winning World War II and all this, they saw him as the second coming of Jesus. So they pretty much named their own religious movement around him, Rastafari, which is his name, Rastafari Makonnen.
Oh, wow. I just got that. Wow. Wow. I mean, that just sounds so nuts to think that, there's a people, Rastafarianism for the most part in Western culture, I think, is boiled down to smoking weed and Bob Marley.
Yeah.
Right. But there are actual very significant religious beliefs attached to it. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think the country of Jamaica, they're one of the people that actually advocate for the restoration of the Ethiopian monarchy, because they actually believe in Ethiopian monarchy more than most Ethiopians now do.
All the way over in Jamaica, like thousands of miles away, and they are.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Wow. Wow. Well, let's move towards like the war and whatnot. These are kind of like, I feel like events like the invasion of Manchuria, Ethiopia are kind of like the canaries in the coal mine, if that's the right word or the right, what I mean?
Yeah, I would say so as well.
Right. You could say like leading up to World War II. So where does, geographically speaking, Ethiopia stand in context of its surroundings? In other words, what are other empires doing around it and stuff like that?
So I think the one of the reasons why Ethiopia wasn't conquered or even occupied by Italy until World War II or any other power was that it's pretty much a country that's a geographic fortress. You can consider it like another Iran or Afghanistan. Ethiopia is surrounded by impassable mountains, harsh desert. Most people around the world don't even realize how vast a size Ethiopia is, where there's over 300 different ethnicities, over 100 different tribes. So it's a population right now of 150 million people. So
150 million.
Yeah, so you would need like a military, like if any country wanted to occupy Ethiopia today, they would need at least 2 million soldiers to even attempt to even try.
That's bonkers.
Yeah, so eventually this is what kept Ethiopia safe, was that it's primarily its geography, where you could just have a localized military. You didn't even need a standing military where that could defend the country, because the terrain is so brutal and harsh. Like even today, Ethiopia primarily does a conscription system. The regular army is only about 200,000, but you can call up about 20 million people if they wanted to. And this is what Italy tried to take advantage of, was that Ethiopia was very, very small. At the same time, Haile Selassie wasn't exactly the most popular emperor at the time. He was still young, and there was a lot of separatist movements that he had to deal with. So Italy took advantage of that. So pretty much the war started was that Haile Selassie knew that Ethiopia, which wasn't as developed as Italy, he knew that he was going to eventually have to force to cede land. So him and the UK, they offered some sort of land concessions, and that wasn't enough. Italy wanted a full conquest of all of Ethiopia, which was an impossible task. So he called up the entire military, all eight able-bodied men, but unfortunately there was a lot of separatist movements. Italy actually faced very, very stiff resistance. Even the first few months of the war, it was nearly impossible to even kick back Ethiopian lines because the terrain was just so harsh. Italy took heavy casualties, and that's when they used their ultimate trump card, which was chemical weapons, mustard gas. And
That's
that
what I've read.
ultimately,
Yeah,
yeah,
that
and
was like the turning point almost.
that was the turning point. And because of that, and along with a lot of pro-Italian collaborators in the country, the emperor was forced to flee. So the UK gave him amnesty. But unfortunately, the world didn't want to sanction Italy due to the fact that fascism in Germany was so rising, they didn't want to push Italy into Germany's camp. But ultimately, Italy chose Germany anyway.
Appeasement, good
Yeah.
old appeasement. Yeah, we talk about that too. Like even the sanctions they applied to Italy were very weak. Like they didn't block the Suez Canal. Like there's so much more they could have done. It was like a slap on the wrist, if that.
Yeah, even though Italy conquered Ethiopia, primarily they only conquered the population centers. The Ethiopian army actually led an insurgency near the impassable mountains in the north and the west, which is how the British was able to get a foothold through, because at that time the British owned Sudan. So that's where like a lot of Ethiopia declared their insurgency from, hit and run attacks.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So the invasion starts in October of 35. Like you talked about, it was very, very brutal. The Ethiopians were able to resist. Really, pretty much, stubborn resistance, much tougher than the Italians anticipated. But let's talk a little bit about gas. I know it's a terrible thing to talk about. So they used gas kind of as a last resort. I know HIM had issued like a December offensive that pretty much stalled it completely and really, really stopped it in its tracks. They use gas. This tends to be the turning point, but they never use gas again. That's like another contrast where I was like, what the heck? Like the Greeks also stopped and even had pushed back into southern Albania.
Yeah. I feel like it's because Italy knew, whereas you could use gas on an African country, using that in Europe would have prompted a very, very large response, because we saw when the Allies liberated a lot of death camps, they couldn't believe that the same gas that was used in World War I was used again in World War II. A lot of people in Europe and America didn't believe Ethiopia's stories that Italy actually used mustard gas until actually the British Army helped liberate Ethiopia, and they actually saw the leftover shells themselves.
Jesus. Yeah. It's so textbook that, of course they would care less about mustard gas and whatever being used on an African country as opposed, to a European one, quote unquote, European, however you define that.
Yeah. And I also think a lot of people thought it was just that Italy probably used it on the Ethiopian army, which is actually false. Like over 150,000 people were killed. They also use it on civilian centers. Jeez. So I feel like Italy probably told the world that, we use mustard gas, but we use it on the army instead of actually civilians. And I think that also was one of the reasons why they weren't sanctioned as much.
That's bonkers. I was kind of privy to it, but 150,000 is a massive amount of people to kill via mustard gas. Just mustard gas by itself is a terrible way to die. It's like Jesus. So we're into the Second Abyssinia War. Let's get into specifically the massacre. Does the massacre take place? To my understanding, it takes place after the war was practically already done.
Yeah,
right?
It was pretty much during the conquest, the 6-year occupation period, where I believe Mussolini appointed Rudolfo Graziani, which was the viceroy in Africa, and Ethiopian guerrillas nearly successfully killed him, and I think they nearly killed the Prince of Italy, who visited as well. So I was like, that's one thing I hate when people say, "Oh, monarchs, they're not involved." Like, even though like the militaries were like in power, they knew. Even like Emperor
Mhm.
Hirohito was nearly executed after World War II.
Oh,
So
wow. Wow.
yes,
I didn't know that.
so like nearly Graziani and the Prince of Italy were nearly killed, and because of it, Graziani he was probably one of the most brutal generals of World War II.
Yeah, he
Ordered,
sounds terrible, really
yeah, he
terrible.
pretty much ordered mass whole scale mass executions against Ethiopians in Addis Ababa, the capital, which ended up being 30,000 people thrown in concentration camps, killed, executed. Even some, because at that time Ethiopia had a very sizable Greek and Armenian minority. They were also killed during the
Oh yeah, that's
massacre as
something I
well.
totally forgot to touch on. Can you drill down on that a tiny bit? Like, do you have any
Yeah.
how that came to be, or I mean,
So a lot of it stemmed from like back then when Ethiopia was actually a Roman ally, trading partner. A lot of Greeks and Armenians, all the way back from the Middle Age period, they would travel. They did a lot of trading in Ethiopia, so they actually ended up immigrating there. So they've had a pretty much a millennia old community, I would say,
yeah,
where they grew up as Armenian Ethiopians, Greek Ethiopians, and grew up as citizens. Ethiopia has a lot of ancient Greek Orthodox, and Armenian Oriental churches that have been there for at least 800 years. So it's a very long lineage.
yeah. I mean, it makes sense, and I mean, even ancient times, like there's stuff about Zeus talking about going down to Ethiopia, like.
Yeah.
There are. I forgot where it is. You'd have to Google it, but it's in Greek mythology. They talk
Uh,
about Ethiopia. I mean,
Even
it's
Haile Selassie, I believe it was a state visit. I think King Paul. I think it was King Paul when he's visit King Paul, and I have to send you the link to it. But he actually talked about a whole speech of the lineage between Greek and Ethiopian relations dating back to like a very long ancient
ancient.
period.
Yeah, yeah, practically ancient times. It makes. I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, send that link. I'll post it for the listeners. That'd be really cool to see. Yeah, and another really cool thing to check out. There's a if you go to YouTube, there's a really cool like that mini documentary on Greek Ethiopians. Literally, just Greek Ethiopians in Addis Ababa, and pretty much all the stuff they go through, even like the racism they go through, kind of by the consulate in terms of trying to get Greek citizenship. Like
Yeah,
they keep getting their citizenship denied and stuff like that.
and unfortunately, that happens to a lot of, especially the Greeks in the Middle East as well, where they're not really seen as Greeks; they're seen as more Arabs.
Yep.
Unfortunately, unfortunately, the Greek government still doesn't believe in protecting its own overseas citizens.
Yeah, story is as well. I don't want to say as old as time, because there was once upon a time when they did.
Oh, but unfortunately, that was one of the main factors why so many Greeks died during the Greek genocide. Was that the Greek government
Right.
never cared about Anatolian Greeks?
Yeah. Yeah. It's wild. I mean, hopefully they take more initiative. I mean, I understand it's a difficult balance for sure, given everything, but so that's really interesting. That's something else that blew my mind when I read about it and I watched that article. Let me read you this one thing that I found online as well. This is a quote by Graziani, who I mean sounds like just not sounds like was a real piece of shit and like totally escaped persecution too after like Nuremberg. A lot of these guys did, of course.
Yeah, a lot of them were helped because, well, Italy is a very, very Catholic country, so the
Mhm.
Vatican
There you
back then,
go.
the Vatican was like a major Nazi collaborator and helped
Huge, yeah.
a lot of collaborationists escape. Even the Croatian Ustashi, a lot of their leaders were funneled to Spain under Francoist Spain by the Catholic Church.
Those guys were terrible, man. Oh my
Yeah.
god, the Utashi.
Even back then, even Germany was like they couldn't believe their brutality.
Yeah, yeah. I remember my undergrad, we were studying about the Utashi, and there was something like one of the commanders or something was like, I demand 5,000 pounds of Serbian eyes on my desk or something crazy,
Yeah.
over the top. Yeah, here's this quote, and this is from Graziani, quote, "Comrades, today is the day we should show our devotion to our viceroy by reacting and destroying the Ethiopians for 3 days. I give you carte blanche to destroy and kill and do what you want to the Ethiopians." Um, so, I mean, that sounds like that's kind of the start of the Yekatit. And then it goes on for 3 days. To this day, of course, I mean, standard, but Italy's not acknowledged anything or any of this, correct?
Yeah, they're not really acknowledging it, but if you think about it, 3 days, 3,000 people killed, that's 10,000 people a day. Pretty much the only massacre in World War II that could even think about that on a short scale was the Japanese occupation of Nanking, when they killed pretty much like close to like 20,000 Chinese civilians a day. It was like that, just that brutal.
That's nuts. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot. That's so much. Yeah, I mean, that's almost equivalent 10,000 a day. That's like the sack of Smyrna, massacre of Smyrna numbers.
And I can't even do that by calculation of 24 hours, but if you think about it, that's hundreds of people per hour.
Easy.
Well, 500 people per hour. Now that I think of it, close to 500 per hour.
500 per hour. Yeah, and from what I read too, it was just like, I mean, it was real. I mean, real assholes. I mean, firing into tents, killing monks,
setting houses on fire.
Jesus. Yeah, and you know, there's this clip by, I think, Mike Vecchione or whatever. He's an Italian comedian, and he goes something along the lines of, you know, Italy was on the side of the Germans in World War II, and you know, they switched side or whatever, but everyone kind of passes up, you know, Italy did a lot of bad things in World War II, and Italy says, yeah, that's true, but don't you like this chicken tratriori or whatever, chicken piccata? He says, Italy gets the write-off because we have good food, he says. And it's a joke, right? Of course. Italy does have good food, but that's kind of goes back to it all, is that Italy gets this write-off with so much. And
I think it's also because when Mussolini was overthrown, Germany ended up occupying Italy for the rest of the war. So
that's a good point.
It was so it gave a lot of plausible deniability by saying,
oh, we also too.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a really good point, actually. Yeah. I mean, something else, yeah. I mean, it's interesting for sure. I mean, this is a hell of a overlooked, I think, very overlooked bloodbath in history, World War II history, really. That's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed what we talked about, and I'm sure we'll have Julian on again in the future to go over some other interesting, overlooked topics in history. Thank you so much. Take care.